You've made it to Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. This episode is brought to you by Peach State Payments. Ethical processing, more profit, less stress. Chiro HD, more than an EHR. Projects management simplified. The Chiro Speaking Company. Attract, educate, and convert. Chiro Spring, cloud-based, user-friendly software with all the essential features chiropractors need. Redmond Real Salt. The IFCO. Chiro Moguls. Chiro Health USA. Sherman College of Chiropractic. Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, and Life West College of Chiropractic. Let's hustle. This episode of Chiro Hustle is brought to you by Relight Hydration by Redmond. Here's the truth. Most Americans are walking around dehydrated, low energy, brain fog, muscle cramps, headaches, and they think they need more caffeine, when what they actually need are electrolytes. Hydration isn't just water. It's sodium, potassium, and trace minerals that help your body actually absorb and use the water. That's where Relight comes in. Made with Redmond Real Salt. No artificial junk, no neon dyes, no sugar overload, just clean, balanced electrolytes designed to support hydration, muscle function, and optimal daily performance. And here's the best part. Grab their sample pack with multiple flavors so you can find your favorite. Once you dial it in, it's an easy daily habit you'll stick with for life. Chiropractors understand this. The nervous system runs on electrical signals. Electrolytes help support that communication. If you're tired or feeling drained by 2 p.m., this is your upgrade. Go to chirohustle.com and get 25% off Relight with our exclusive promo. If you want a wholesale Redmond products, see the show notes for the wholesale application. Hydrate smarter, perform better, stay aligned.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 775 of the Chiro Hustle Podcast. I'm your producer, Luke Millette, and here's your host, James Chester.
So today we have the opportunity of interviewing Darryl Bosshardt. And if you want to hear a conversation about Redmond Real Salt and growing up in a salt family, stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome back. This is another episode of the Chiro Hustle Podcast. Today I have Darryl Bosshardt on with me. Redmond Real Salt. Go check out their brand. I can't say enough about what they're doing out there in the Utah area and how they've gone really national as a brand. But I'm really thankful that they've come on as a sponsorship for the Chiro Hustle Podcast. And by the time today's episode is complete, I hope you guys learn a whole lot more about the Redmond brand and the business behind it and why salt is so important for your quality of life. But before we get into all things salt and all things Redmond, I want to let you know our big why. Why do we do what we do at Chiro Hustle? Well, first things first is freedom of speech. I think it's so integral to the world to have a platform that has integrity and truth behind it. And that's our tenets of why we do what we do. But also we believe in medical freedom and family health freedom. We believe that the chiropractic profession provides that to people. And if you're looking for those solutions and looking for answers for you and your family, reach out to a chiropractor in your city or neighborhood and see if they can help you out with some of these questions you might have about clarity behind family health and medical freedom. More philosophically speaking, we do believe in B.J. Palmer's Sacred Trust. I know Darryl probably doesn't know a whole lot about the chiropractic history, but philosophy really matters to this beautiful profession. And if you guys want to learn more about B.J. Palmer and the Sacred Trust, go to the show notes, click on it, and you're going to learn a whole lot more about the beautiful profession of chiropractic. Philosophically speaking, we do believe in subluxation-based chiropractic. We believe in innate intelligence, universal intelligence, and the educated intelligence. We believe that when man or woman, the physical gets adjusted, it connects them to man or woman, the spiritual. That might sound a little woo-woo to people, but really these are the tenets and the philosophy of chiropractic. So a lot of the reason that we do this is because a lot of the kids are coming out of chiropractic school and they're not getting a good fundamental education on philosophy. So if you know a chiropractic student or a young grad, please share the show with them so they get more access points to what chiropractic really means and what the philosophy of chiropractic means to them in their career. So with that, this is episode 775 of the Chiro Hustle Podcast. Darryl, welcome to the show.
James, thanks for having me on. It was exciting when I saw this pop up as an opportunity, and I'm delighted to be able to speak about all things salt today. My brother is actually a chiropractor, so I'm not completely unaware of the industry, but certainly nowhere well versed as you or most of your audience.
Well, there's a lot of students that listen to our shows, and there's a lot of practitioners that listen to our shows. So I think that having the congruent message to say, hey, a lot of people don't know, even if people have been practicing for 30 years, they might have not um, been aware of what the sacred trust is, and they should definitely go and refresh themselves. And if they've lost scope of the philosophy of the profession, I think it's important for people to refresh themselves on that too. So, not saying that you don't know enough, but I think that everybody can learn a little bit more, and that's really what makes this show so unique and amazing. Is we shine a light on other people's genius and let them talk about their careers and how they got to where they are. But I think today we really got to talk about Redmond because that's a big part of your life. And you grew up in a salt family, and maybe you could take us back to like the early chapters of life that you can remember and tell us what it was like to grow up in that salt family.
It is kind of fun. I joke all the time. When was little, my dad would say, "Hey, if you don't straighten up, I'm going to send you to the salt mines." And it wasn't really a threat. It was actually a great day to be able to go, spend a day running up and down the salt hills, or spend a day in the mine. And to give you a little background about the history of the company itself, we have to go back to actually World War II. So in World War II, my grandfather was a riveter, actually at Douglas Aircraft, which then became McDonnell Douglas. And his brother during the war was a miner at Kennecott. It's the big mining company here in Utah, the big copper company. And so that's what they did during the war, for the war effort. One was making airplanes, and the other one was mining copper. And then after the war, the two brothers went back to their dad's farm because they wanted to farm there, and they wanted to raise their kids, near each other. And so they had this little farm in central Utah. And underneath the farm, they knew there was some ancient salt crystals. In fact, the Native Americans, the early Anasazi and the ancestral Puebloan Indians that actually created the Mesa Verde Indian ruins and the Fremont Indian State Park, that actually harvested this salt long before the early pioneers and the settlers had come to the valley. So they knew there was salt there. And then in the 1950s, there was a drought, kind of like we're going to have in Utah this year, that pretty much wiped a lot of the farms out. And these two brothers, Milo and Lamar, they needed something to do to keep food on the table and to feed the kids. And so with my grandpa's business experience at Douglas and his brother's mining experience at Kennecott, they decided, hey, let's go into the salt business. So they kind of a, story where these two brothers went and got a big old loan and bought a bulldozer and some mining equipment and plowed the corn and the alfalfa out of the way and started selling salt, initially to cows, because cows need salt like you and I do. And then in the 1970s, when the health food movement really started to take off, a nutritionist came through and said, this salt, you're feeding this to cows? This is the best, tastiest salt in the world. And so the family sat around and said, hey, what do we call this stuff? It's not half salt. It's not fake salt. It's not, it's just real salt. And that's how the brand Real Salt came to be. And now it's, in every health food store and in a lot of grocery stores across the country. And, salt, it's mundane. It's actually, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's the definition of a commodity. And it's boring, and people think that salt's salt. But hopefully by the end of our discussion today, you'll realize that salt isn't just salt. And it's actually, in order of importance, it's the third most important thing that keeps us alive. Oxygen is probably number one, and then water is number two, and then salt and minerals are number three. Because outside of a spiritual discussion, the only difference in you and I being alive 1 minute and being dead on the ground the next minute is the absence of an electric current. That's really the only difference in me being alive and dead outside of a spiritual discussion. And we learned in grade school that our bodies are 72% water, which means that if I'm 150 pounds, I'm 70 142 pounds of mineral, no, 108 pounds of mineral and 108 pounds of water and 42 pounds of mineral. That's really all that I am. And so if I don't replace those minerals and salts, it's game over.
Well, it's fascinating to me to hear you share the story, number one, and to go back into war times and the health movement of the 70s and really the foundation of the business. And I think that when we talk about a little bit further down the road, the electricity inside the body, the nervous system, the functionality, one of the words I said during today's introduction of the show, Why We Do What We Do, is the tenets of the conversation behind subluxation, innate intelligence, universal intelligence, and the educated intelligence. And I think when we're talking about the functionality of the body and the elements that it's made up of, number one, we have, the water in our bodies, and we have light in our bodies, which is electricity. And vitality is the real anchor for all of this. And the more vital somebody is, the healthier they are, the longer their life is. When people start to lack lightness in their body and they don't function at a high enough level, their body starts to diminish and to break down over time. So I think that it is important for us to keep our water electrolyte up. And, the word electrolyte is electricity through light. And I think that when people start to understand the semantics around the way that words are built, subluxation, less light in the body, vitality, there's so much that goes into understanding the semantics of words and how they get built out. So when we think about the growth of the business and how it can make people's lives more vital, what was it like for you to start experiencing the popularity of growth in that business? Like you said, it expanded into, the health food stores, and it expanded now into in my opinion, it's in many, many chain stores and grocery stores. What was it like for you to see this boom in the family business?
I love that question. And I love it really goes into what you're doing as far as just educating and helping people see and learn some of the realities that maybe we miss because we're so busy. One of the fun family stories, when we first started selling salt, we saw this, mineral salt from Utah, and it has this, rosy quartz, pink, red color to it. And when you think about my grandmother, back in the 1950s and 60s and even the 70s, the quote unquote, good food was white sugar and white flour and all of this purified stuff. And so when company would come over to the house at our house and my grandma's house, we always used the, dirty salt. And when company would come over, my grandma would actually, because she was so embarrassed that her salt had color and minerals in it, because the fancy salt was all this highly processed salt and highly processed sugar and highly processed flour, she would actually hide the dirty salt so she wouldn't be looked down on for having an inferior salt. And it's funny, but it's also kind of sad that we as a population went through this period where white sugar was seen as superior and white flour was seen as superior and white highly processed salt was seen as superior. And we went through a period where we thought that all fat was bad. Not everybody, but a big part of the population thought, all fat was bad. We should avoid all fat, not realizing the nuance of some fats. Yes, you should absolutely avoid and never let it cross your mouth. There's other fats that you should spend a lot of time seeking out. And salt is actually the same way. There's a lot of highly processed salts that you should avoid, like you would highly processed fats. And at the same time, go out of your way to seek out really good natural salts the way nature provided them for us.
Listening to you share the story about your grandma is like, it's kind of like a marketing thing. And I think a lot of times that marketing actually moves the perception of culture a lot more than the truth of a product or a brand. And when something takes market share, like white sugar, white salt, white flour, people gravitate towards that because that's what's popular. And I think that that's a big issue when it comes to how people perceive quality of something. Is you want to keep up with the Joneses, as they always used to say, and what are they doing, and how are they, like, like but now you see like sugar in the raw, even like it's the brown sugar, and you go get a burrito at Chipotle. Like, do you want the white rice or the brown rice? Like we're going back to like native ingredients and like, real true um consumer products, and we're not whitewashing everything. And I think that when you think about like the salt world, there is a lot of refinement that goes on to produce a product, but there's also what is inside of that salt that makes what you guys have so unique that the rest of the world doesn't get. So I think that the potency of the pink salt that you guys have, or the red salt that you guys have, is definitely a product that people are starting to wake up to say, hey, this is a superior product. How do I get more of that? So I think it's really great that you share like the history and the timeline of where we were, but we're going 60, 70 years into the future. Where have you seen the trend actually shift to where people want more real salt rather than the iodized salt?
I think part of that is, and historically, the current generation always criticizes the younger generation, back in our day, but one of the things that I am really impressed with is, and I'd be interesting to do a Google search to see if the word is being used more, but words like intentional, and being very conscious consumer and intentional consumer. And I love that I'm with my kids and my friends, I'm hearing that word used more often, and they're wanting to live more intentionally and being more in touch with their food, and their lifestyle, and the products they get in general. There's a question that I'll often get asked at trade shows or in podcasts like this is, hey, you've talked about the importance of salt. I've heard it from my chiropractor. I've heard it from my nutritionist. Yeah, I get it. I should probably get better, but how can I find the great product? I mean, there's a lot of great products to choose from. And I tell people there's really just 3 questions. And if you ask these 3 questions, you'll find a great salt. I think you'll find a great supplement or a great basil at the farmer's market. And with salt, I think some of these questions are even more important. So the first one is, who's producing it? Today, if you went to a grocery store or a big box store, a health food store even, and grabbed a shaker of salt off the shelf, to know who is actually making the salt that's in that shaker is very difficult, because a lot of salt is commingled. And so they'll produce the salt, they ship it to an open port, goes into a big warehouse or facility. They'll run it down a line, mix with a bunch of other salts, put different labels on it. It might be a gray salt, a pink salt, a black salt, a blue salt, or a white salt. But to know who actually made the salt in that shaker is extremely difficult. And it's important to know who that is, because you can't get the second 2 questions if you don't know who's producing it. So the first one is who. Same thing at a farmer's market. Go to a farmer's market and you buy some basil. Is it actually from the guy that's selling you the basil, or is it coming from 3 or 4 states away? The second question is, what's the source? In salt, all salt can be defined as sea salt because it's coming from a sea bed at some point. It might be a current ocean, like the Great Salt, or like the San Francisco Bay, or maybe the Sea of Gulf of America, or the Sea of Japan, or the Mediterranean. It might be a Dead Sea, like the Dead Sea in Israel, called the Dead Sea, or the Dead Sea here in Utah, called the Great Salt Lake. Or it might be an ancient or prehistoric seabed, like the Bolivian pink salt in Bolivia, or the Nepal and Himalayan pink salt out of Pakistan and Nepal. Or it could be the Redmond Real Salt from the ancient seabed here in Utah, but it's coming from a seabed at some point. The reason that's important is, if I were getting my salt from, the Gulf of America, and there's a BP oil spill there, I don't want to be getting my salt during that natural disaster or unnatural national disaster, or from the Sea of Japan when the nuclear meltdown took place. So knowing where that's coming from is really important. The Dead Sea here in Utah, called the Great Salt Lake, is a very polluted body of salt water. Lots of mercury, lots of chemicals in the Great Salt Lake. So not a good source if you're going to be eating it. So where is the source is really important. The third, and I would say the most important question, is what are they doing to it? Are they taking anything out, or are they putting anything in? Now with salt, that's really interesting, because seawater, if we were back 2,000 years ago, went to the ocean and scooped up a bucket of seawater and evaporated it, that seawater, we're going to see calcium, potassium, magnesium, selenium, zinc, phosphorus, iodine, copper. I mean, the over 50 minerals in trace amounts in that seawater. Well, manufacturers realized that they could take a membrane or a different liner and could bring in the seawater into a single pond and leach off the calcium chloride. Then they can move it to the next pond and pull off the magnesium chloride and then the calcium chloride. So through, calcium, potassium, magnesium, you can start to demineralize this seabed. And then you can sell the salt left over as salt. And so in salt companies, a good question is, are you taking anything out? Because salt companies do that, because they can take the potassium chloride and sell it, or the calcium chloride and sell it as a vitamin or a supplement. But the bigger problem with salt, I say, is salt is actually hygroscopic. So salt absorbs water out of the air. This is really important because salt's job in the body, and we'll get into this in a second, is to regulate the intracellular and extracellular fluids outside of the neurological and nerve transport that happens because of electricity. So salt and water reaction is really important. Because of that, salt will suck water out of the air. It's called hygroscopic, which means if I have salt in a shaker and it sucks water into the shaker because it's hygroscopic, the shaker will get sticky. And so years ago, some salt companies got together and said, hey, what kind of chemicals can we coat salt crystals with to stop the salt's ability to interact with moisture? So when it's humid and it rains, the salt doesn't get clumpy in the shaker. The problem, and they found a whole list of chemicals that'll do that. Things like sodium silicoaluminate and sodium ferrocyanide and tricalcium phosphate and propylene glycol 400. So these chemicals will stop the salt's ability to interact with moisture. But that's its job in the body. And so if you look at a salt label and it has additives in it, dextrose, iodine, other additives, sodium silicoaluminate, that's not salt. That's this processed version of salt that our ancestors wouldn't even recognize. And so if you ask those three questions, you might end up with Redmond Real Salt. And I'm biased. I think we're one of the best, but you might find another great salt out there as long as you know who's producing it, know the source, and find out what they're doing to it or not doing to it.
You've made it to Chiro Hustle. Sit back and learn from the greatest influencers in the profession on the world's #1 chiropractic podcast. This episode is brought to you by Peach State Payments. Ethical processing, more profit, less stress. Chiro HD, more than an EHR. Practice management simplified. The Chiro Speaking Company. Attract, educate, and convert. Chiro Spring, cloud-based, user-friendly software with all the essential features chiropractors need. Redmond Real Salt. The IFCO, Chiro Moguls, Chiro Health USA, Sherman College of Chiropractic, Pure Chiro Notes, Titronics, and Life West College of Chiropractic. Let's hustle. Hey docs, let me ask you something. Are you adjusting patients but not adjusting your revenue? Because a lot of chiropractors are still undercharging without even realizing it. They're accepting insurance allowances that are just too low, and they're hesitant to raise the fees because they're worried about pushback from patients. The problem is, when your fees and financial systems aren't aligned, it creates a slow leak in your practice. And when you try to grow, more marketing, more patients, maybe even another location, the leak gets bigger. There's actually a smarter way to handle this. Chiro Health USA helps chiropractors charge appropriately when insurance is available while still serving cash or limited benefit patients through a compliant discount medical plan. The results? Many practices see revenue increases around 15 to 20% without adding more visits. Same patients, better margins, more freedom. If you want to stop leaving money on the table and build a practice that's both profitable and compliant, check out chirohealthusa.com to learn more. Lots of things to unpack there when it comes to the quality of the brand. I knew that today's conversation with you would be very advantageous for people to learn more about salt quality, number one. But also, I want to go back to the business. I know that I've been leveraging business during the early part of our talk, but did you always know that you would work in the salt business when you went to college? Did you know that you were going to go in and, go for your bachelor's of science and then go for your MBA? Did you know that that path was going to bring you back to helping the family business? Or did you just kind of think you were going to go off to college and, who knew what the great wide open would present to you? But did you know that with your education, you were going to go back home eventually and work in the family business?
In school, I remember I went through different phases. I always loved working in the salt business. I'm one of 8 children. And as a kid, I think I was the only one that really loved the salt business. I've got a brother that's a chiropractor, sister who's an attorney. I've got a brother who's an MD, pediatrician. And I've always just loved the salt business, even when I was young. Going through college, I thought it would be fun to be a wrestling coach and maybe teach either adjunct at a college or teach at a high school and coach wrestling. By the time I finished college, I was really excited to get back into the salt business and figured maybe I could teach in the salt business. And so I love doing things like this because it kind of scratches that educator itch. And although I've never coached wrestling, I ended up doing a lot more mountain biking than wrestling after I left high school. But for me, I've always loved the business side of it. And especially when it comes to the connection and seeing the impact that something as simple as salt is, can change people's lives. People have heard salt's bad for them and salt's boring. Yet if we go back into antiquity, salt traded ounce for ounce with gold. And the saying is a man worth his salt was because the Roman soldiers were actually paid a salary, again, salt-based, in salt because they could trade it for anything in the world. Without a refrigerator, all food will spoil. So if you don't have a refrigerator, you have to have salt to preserve your food. And so your kimchis, your sauerkrauts, all of your preserved meats outside of season, salt was essential, which is why it was the universal currency for so long. And for me, that's exciting. And as boring as salt is for some, you can tell I get pretty excited about it.
Well, that's just it. Is like the business. There's a I think his name is Earl Nightingale. He has this piece called Acres of Diamonds. So you're familiar with that?
Love the story of Acres of Diamonds. And I think, my grandfather and his brother, that's a fun, they could have traveled the world, and yet right under their feet was this beautiful, either because of serendipity or because of divine connection, had this beautiful salt right under their farm the entire time.
And that's just the whole business of this is we want to refine it. We want to shift it. We want to change it. But sometimes the thing that you have right underneath you is the greatest gift that you'll ever find. And, I believe that that's the same for our health. When we go full circle on today's conversation, really the man that has his health has a million dreams. The man that doesn't has one. And that's really why I love the profession of chiropractic, is because it brings people to the million dreams and it restores people. It clears the functionality to performance again. And I think that that's really why aligning with businesses like Redmond is vital for not only the chiropractor to understand what you guys are doing out there in Utah, but why it's important for every mom and dad and person that wants to have more knowledge on quality of life and functionality of life. And I think that the Redmond brand gives that to people. So when I first met Julie at Parker Seminars 2 years ago, I thought there was something really there. When I tried the brand, when I came out and toured the mine, I've been on the mine tour twice now. And when I actually saw where like you're saying, know where the product is being produced from and understand the quality of the operation and see where the salt is actually living, because that's where it lives. It lives in the ancient seabed out there in Redmond, Utah, and you guys extract it. And the really cool thing is to understand how you've developed different product lines and different brand lines around it, which I definitely want to touch on. But um, let's go back to the product and the consistency in the brand, and why every chiropractor should have this on their tables at home and at their clinics, because I do think that there's a quality that you guys present, that you guys have formulated, that comes right from the earth. And there's a distinction within the Redmond brand that I think that every chiropractor should take into consideration as a supplement. And I know that that's where I want to go next, is the product line that you guys have developed. But why should every chiropractor have Redmond at their table at home?
We talked about the importance of hydration, and today there's a lot of companies selling hydration products, which is important because you can go to the hospital and spend hundreds or maybe thousands of dollars to get an IV, which is essentially just saline solution, which is 0.9% salts, because our bodies are saline solution in motion. And so fortunately, we're getting away now from all of the processed sugary sports drinks that were all the rage in the 80s and 90s, when hydration was seen as important, but not looking at all the other garbage that's in so many sports drinks. So when you think about good health and good nutrition, great sleep, good water, we talk about great food. You have to have good food in the gas tank, all of these good analogies. The one thing that's still overlooked by many is the importance of hydration. And when I say hydration, I don't mean just water, because water alone is actually dehydrating. And that's because water, you could drink all the distilled water in the world, but your tears will still be salt. Your sweat's going to be salt. Your urine's going to be salt. Our cerebral spinal fluid are going to be salt. We have to have salts to live. And so if we say, hey, water's important, you should be drinking, half your body weight in ounces, which is good advice, probably is the minimum. That's great, unless but you also have to have the salt for that good hydration. And so I think good salt should be a staple on every kitchen table. And once somebody starts eating a more natural food diet, you have to add salt. Now, if you're eating out of cans and boxes like you lived in the 1950s, 60s, or 70s, and you are getting way too much processed food generally, and processed salt on processed food makes the food last longer than it should. But if somebody's going away from that processed diet and they're eating fresh, fresh vegetables, fresh meats, fresh produce, they actually have to add good salt. And so many salts aren't good. And so that's why I think it should be a staple in every office and in every home.
Yeah, it brings me back to my curiosity. I was telling you like why I got into journalism before we went live today, and my curiosity always a lot of it's self-serving, but also I know what I'm curious about helps more people. Why do you think that it was never branded stay hydrated and use salt? Why do you think that we were only left with the idea that the more water we drink, the better for us?
I think it actually happened, the disconnect, in the 1940s and 50s, because if we go back before then, we knew salt was important. In fact, the military has always had salt tablets because they knew it was important. Roman soldiers were paid in salt because they knew it was important. In the 1950s, there was a medical doctor, Dow, and he did a study trying to find out the relationship between sodium and blood pressure and heart. And in this study, he took mice and injected them with 20 times the safe amount of sodium and restricted their access to water. And if you inject a mouse with 20 times the safe amount of salt and you don't allow the mouse to drink water to offset that extra salt and sodium because of the sodium potassium pump and the water sodium balance that the body naturally will do if it has abundant access to both, that study created this salt scare. And so during the 1950s and then 60s and then 70s, we heard, oh, salt's bad. In the same breath, they would say that in the hospital, they would be hooking you up to an IV of saline solution. And so to your point earlier, marketing can be great if it helps people find better ways to live their life. Unfortunately, marketing can also help people go down a road that is completely negative to the body and to the soul and the spirit. And so I think that marketing for a period there, traced back to this 1950s study, sent the world down this horrible path of the low salt diet. And I give a presentation, I call it Natural Salts and the Mistake of the Low Salt Diet. Because if you go to antiquity, people don't overdose on salt. And it's the most important thing. And in the hospital, you can't overdose on salt if you have an IV because your kidneys will flush the salt. Your kidneys, a healthy kidney can process almost 4 ounces of salt a day. That's half of that shaker healthy kidneys can process. So it's not the salt, it's the processed salt on processed foods with lack of water that causes a lot of problems.
Well, it's a health game. And, like no one gives you the blueprint for a better quality of life. You have to go figure out how to do this for yourself. And, even if you tell somebody what to do, exactly how to do it, they're going to do it their own way. So it's important for us to have these honest conversations about, my curiosity is, why didn't they always tell people, hey, not only you're supposed to drink half your body weight in ounces of water every day, but you're supposed to have this amount of salt in that water every day. Like, that's the real disconnect. And I think like the outset of today's conversation, that's the clarity moment for everybody, in my opinion, is it's not just half your body weight in ounces of water daily, but it's also, you have to have this much salt into your diet every day. So I think that that's the electrical engine inside of us. Like you said earlier, you're only worth your weight in salt. But also our body is run off of electricity. Our body is run off of salt and water. So if we're deficient in one and we're overabundant in the other, and it's like the math is broken. Like when people think about like making math make sense, like if you say, hey, just put all this water into a human body and it's supposed to function the way it's supposed to, like that's leaving out the real part of the math equation, that if you want to be hydrated and functional, you need to add salt into that water to where you get electrical process going through the cells, going through the nervous system, hydrating the body for functionality to where the body's actually satiated and it's not hungry all the time and it's not thirsty all the time. It's actually balanced. And I think that's really today's conversation, where we're coming back to home, is if we tell people the truth about what salt is and hydration, what it really is, they can walk away from today's episode with a lot more resources and knowledge to know that they shouldn't just drink half their body weight in ounces of water every day. They should make sure that they're hydrating with good quality salt within that diet threshold, and making sure that they're paying attention to their salt intake as well as their water intake. And I just feel like we've been let down, because I've been in the chiropractic profession for 17 years and I've never told anybody to take salt.
One of the nice ways or easy ways to get started, there's that half your body weight in ounces and then adding a 1/4 teaspoon of salt per quart of water that you drink. You can do that for pennies on the dollar compared to buying an IV in the hospital or, going and spending IV at a clinic. Another really fun way to test your salt levels, I have a dish of salt here on my desk. This is just our coarse salt. And I will just have it at my desk, and occasionally throughout the day, just put a piece of salt under my tongue. In fact, if I ever have a sugar craving, putting a piece of salt under your tongue will actually satisfy that sugar craving so many times, because that's a a misconception. Our bodies think we want sugar, but we actually just need salt. And so by having a dish of salt and just putting it in your mouth, if that salt tastes good, you're probably low on salt. Just like when you take that first drink of water after a marathon or a long ride, it tastes great because you're so deprived. When natural salt tastes like candy, you know you need more salt.
See, these are the reasons why these curiosity interviews outside of the chiropractic, model that I usually follow open up more eyes and give people more insight and brand awareness for you guys with Redmond. This is a good anchor point for us to move forward with the conversation next time on all things salt. And I know I wanted to get to the point of talking about product brand and expansion and how you got to that, but I think we can leave some of these questions for the next interview that I have with you guys. But I am curious. You said that the salt mine is in Redmond, Utah, in the central part of the state. And back in the 50s, you guys discovered that there was a salt deposit. And slowly but surely, you guys have worked on getting the brand out as a national brand. Relight is something that I do daily. People don't know what Relight is. Can you maybe give people a glimpse of what that product is and how you guys expanded into Relight?
Yeah. So real briefly, over the years, would have customers that would come and talk to us and say, "Hey, I love your salt. I'm a professional athlete. Could I get an electrolyte drink mix to put in my water bottle on my event?" And so we decided to launch into that. And we actually have a lot of other products that are all a result of customers coming to us and asking for those. I used to tell people the best, sports nutrition drink, if you didn't want the purple and the pink and the sugary stuff, is to take a quart of good, clean water, add a quarter teaspoon of salt, a squeeze of lemon, and a little bit of honey or fig syrup if you want it a little sweeter. And that's fine, but it's also not as convenient. And so what we did is we took our salt and added some additional potassium and calcium and magnesium, some coconut water powder, and made a brand. We call it Relight, or is Re-Electrolyte. And it just is a really easy powder to put into a drink or a bottle when you're a roofer or you're a chiropractor and you've been on your feet all day and the office is hot and you can just kind of feel like your electrolytes are dropping. Or your clients, whether they're firefighters, roofers, school teachers. We often think of electrolytes and we think they have to be for athletes. It can be for so much more than that. And so that's why we have our brand Relight, to make it easier just to have electrolytes on the go.
Well, next time I'll cover more about the product expansion and the different product suite you guys have within the Redmond brand line. And I think it is really important for people to understand that the products that you do give people more vitality, adds more quality to people's lives. And I think today's conversation was really integral for people to understand the baseline of the business and to know that salt with water is really healthy for you. And it's not just half of your body weight in ounces of water every day, but throw a little salt in there too. And I think that that's a really good takeaway for today's episode. Is there anything that I didn't touch on that you thought we should have talked about before we close out today?
No, this has been great, James. I look forward to our next visit. And if any of your listeners have questions about salt, maybe we can keep notes of those and do some Q&A on our next visit. But I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, today's episode by Redmond Real Salt was eye-opener for me. And I think that there's just a lot of product out there that what they're doing with different toothpastes, and they are infusing different things with salt, and the face scrubs, and just the different things that you guys are realizing that the demand for the product is there, and how your product line can get into everybody's bathrooms and get the common 2 days of use of a tooth routine for dental hygiene, I think is really, really cool. But I think that you guys are working around the clock, figuring out new product lines that can go into people's homes. So I just want to commend you guys for having a great business model and inviting people out there to get boots on the ground to see what the operation's all about and to build a future with a great American company. So thank you for supporting the Chiro Hustle podcast, Darryl. And just want to say a big shout out to all of your team out there that's invited me into the Redmond family. And I'm looking forward to the next opportunity we get a chance to be out there and to share more episodes on the Chiro Hustle podcast together.
Well, thank you so much. Redmond.com is an easy website to find us. You can see our protein powders and the new stuff we have coming out. And sure appreciate your time, James.
Yep. And for everybody out there, go over to the Chiro Hustle podcast and click on their sponsorship link and take the test drive. And like I tell everybody on the sponsorship ad, try their mix pack of Relight electrolyte product, and just want to get everybody integrated into the Redmond family, just as I am. And eventually I'm going to be hosting some 72-hour water fasts with the Relight brand. So be on the lookout for those episodes too, and that initiative that we're going to be doing at Chiro Hustle, bringing more people on that journey, letting their bodies live on the salt and water that we're supposed to. With that being said, this is episode number 775. Darryl Bosshardt, thank you for being on with me today, and we'll see you guys in the next episode. Thanks for listening to Chiro Hustle. Don't forget to subscribe and check back next week to continue hustling.